Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome along to this workshop from the Professional Advice Group Committee of Financial Services Council. We've got an absolutely stunning lineup of speakers here this afternoon. It's high quality, terrific people. You'll enjoy every minute they've got to say. This afternoon, we're looking at the professional advice, how to promote it, how to make it more accessible, to address the issues concerned, and to hopefully further everyone's understanding and awareness of how professional advice can play in our market going forward. So, briefly, can I introduce the speakers here? Sorry, I'm David Whyte, for those who don't know me, Chairman of Strategy, amongst other entities. And also in the Financial Services Committee's Professional Advice Group. I've got Anna Livesey here, who is the Head of Customer Experience and Design for ANZ Bank. Anna is a fan of behavioural science, as am I. I think some interesting conversations in how consumers are influenced and how they can be biased in the terms of the behavioural science studies. I think we mentioned the Dunning-Kruger effect in the blurb for this effect. I can't think of any American politicians. Sorry? No, of course, no, absolutely free from it all. Absolutely, completely absolved. And I just can't think of any American politicians that come to hand who might be suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect, but maybe you guys can. We've got Dave Bishop here, second to there. David's the head of research for FSC, one of the mainstays of the Financial Services Council, and certainly a major contributor to the progress and the success that the FSC's had in recent years. So welcome, David. James Blair, Wealth Director from Lighthouse Financial. Good to see you, James. Welcome aboard. We'll hear some interesting views from Lighthouse's perspective, I've no doubt. And Jeremy Graham, CEO from FNZ, New Zealand. Some of you may have noticed that Adrian Durham's stepping down as a Group Chief Executive, Jeremy, so I'm looking to see where you're going next, but no promises. So yeah, look, this workshop really is going to be interactive. There'll be some questions available to you, which will come through on the laptop for Clarissa there, my able assistant. And there's microphones going around here, but it's such a small room. If there's any questions that you want to ask, kind of save them till we get through some of the presentations and the conversations, and then just shout out, and we'll have an interaction. But I would like to start with young Mr. Bishop. He certainly has an extensive background in the research. And I was just going to find where he put his particular. No, anyway, David's research has been widely distributed in the past, and in relation to the advice piece, there's some extensive analysis that he's done here. And I think, David, I'll kind of hand it over to you to take it from there, if you don't mind.
I'll try without the microphone. Is that loud enough for everybody? Yeah. Cool. So thank you, David. I'm a research lead at the FSC. I've been at the FSC now for 6 or 7 years, and over that time we have produced around about 30 research reports over that 6-year period. And we kind of revamped it around 2020, and it was just before COVID came over here, where we actually went out and we go out once every year to a statistically representative number of New Zealanders, and we asked them a bunch of questions. And in 2020, we asked them a bunch of questions about their financial well-being and their relationship to their own overall well-being. And it was the first time we'd kind of done that. I think we all kind of know that people's well-being is pretty much, finances pretty much can affect it, but what we were trying to do is to really try to start understanding that. So we came out with our Financial Resilience Index. The first one was in March 2022, and where we asked 5 questions around financial confidence, literacy, preparedness, job security, because we knew that that had an impact on people's financial well-being, and then overall well-being, where we looked at physical, mental, and mental well-being stats. And so we continued that now over the last sort of 5-6 years, and so we started to get quite a lot of trend data. And just as a bit of a snapshot from that, This year, that trend data said about 250,000 more New Zealanders were worrying about money either daily or weekly, which is just kind of nuts when you start thinking about it. And then we sort of looked around, okay, what other data are we getting? And so then we produced some other reports within the year, which are called our Money and You reports. The first one was playing on this idea that it's not about money, it's about you, which is kind of a stark statement. It came from, I live on Waiheke and had some lovely little commutes before my then boss, Richard Clippin, decided to move to Waiheke and then bother me every morning on the ferry going in. But it was one of the things we talked about. Yeah, sure. Is that one of the things we talked about on the ferry was this idea of actually, okay, money is really important, but it's how we treat money, and that's where we want to start investigating and going forward. So fast forward to last year, we came up with this a complication in the data, which was sort of saying people are really financially confident. 85% of people were saying, hey, I'm really confident that I know what I'm doing with my finances. This is no problem for me. We're all good, which left about the remainder saying they weren't confident. And then what we decided to do was to test this a little bit and say, rather than just sort of ask people, what do you think? We gave them 4 relatively basic financial trivia questions. One was on interest rates. One was on KiwiSaver if you moved from into a growth fund rather than having a balanced fund. One was on risk management. And what we found there was actually when we looked at those scorings, so we asked 4 questions, if you got 3 or more out of 4, we said you were fairly competent in this very basic kind of piece of research. If you got 2 or less, then you probably weren't as knowledgeable as you might think. And this is where the idea of the perception gap came. So we had 80% of people saying, I am confident in what I'm doing, but only 60% actually answered the questions correctly, those top 2. And then conversely, the other 20% said, I'm not very confident with my money. I don't know really what I'm doing. But they came out at this 40%. Actually, they knew a lot more than they thought they knew. So the Dunning-Kruger effect to that point is this idea of overconfidence. We know we can all be overconfident in certain spaces, but actually there's a real problem with underconfidence as well, and getting people to believe in what they do actually know and can achieve. And I guess I'll finish at that point just with one last point, is that the most confident, people that said they weren't confident about their money affairs types of people were women. But when they did the test, they're the ones that came out with the more right answers in terms of the trivia answers. So I think, there's a real issue here when we start delving into data around understanding the different demographics and different age groups and where they go. And I'm happy to talk about more data as we go through the call, if that's a good enough introduction.
You'd expect women to know more about finances than men. That's kind of natural. Just before I came in here, one of our colleagues at FSC stopped and asked, where is it that I can go to find a financial advisor? And where do I get advice from? This is one of our colleagues. So, long answer, come along to the seminar, to the workshop. So was there anything in the research that you dug up, that you found where people go to get help for financial advice?
Yeah, so the latest research, which we're launching tomorrow, so I don't want to go into too much detail because I have to break in embargo. But hey, there's a few stark facts I'll pop out there first, and then we'll talk around where people go to advice. But this latest research we're launching tomorrow, it talks about 94% of New Zealanders are concerned about their finances. And that is staggering. So we're not a representative of New Zealand in this room, but in terms of the numbers. But that means that everybody you're sat next to, talking to just about, has got financial concerns. That's the first point. Yep. The second point I'll just lead into is, to start answering your question, is our research points to around about a quarter of New Zealanders get financial advice. But when they do, the numbers are so starkly different between those that don't. So those that get financial advice and are confident about their finances, it runs around 60%, slightly less. those that don't get financial advice are around 23% in terms of confidence. So there's about a 40% confidence gap for people that are advised versus people that aren't advised. So that's a key point, I think, which is good, would be a really good debate. The other places people are going are to their friends and to their families, which is all well and good. And I'm sure everybody has an experience of having a conversation with a friend or a family member about something to do with financial services or KiwiSaver, and they just don't know. And my example was a friend of a friend, we were having a glass of wine or in the sunshine one summer, and he said, I really want to be able to buy a house for me and my family, but I just can't afford to do it. And I was like, oh, okay, have you looked into releasing some money from your KiwiSaver? And it was a time when there was first home loans and stuff about, and he hadn't. Off he went. A year later, he found his first house, and it was not advice; it was just a simple conversation. And I think there's a good thing within that, just having those conversations, helping people move. But it's also can be negative if people that also don't really understand perhaps some of the intricacies are giving help or advice, maybe pointing in the wrong direction. So I think there's quite a lot to unpack there.
Just on that point, David, about knowing, how did your research throw up any insights into the level of financial literacy or lack of?
Yeah, so financial literacy sits about 40% according to our research. So in terms of people being comfortable, which is this gap between confidence and literacy, which is what's creating this perception gap. And I think this the gap's widening, which is problematic, right? So it isn't though that people are getting better educated or self-reporting that they aren't getting better educated. And my and it's anecdotal and it's just from doing the research and it's not reliable data, but my view on that is people are really confident perhaps in the day-to-day managing money, but as soon as it starts to move into any complication, which the kind of around the questions that we ask for the perception gap, it starts to drop off and be more complicated. But and you're probably all much more aware of that working in the financial advice space than I am, but there's just interesting little juxtapositions, I think, in the data, which is telling.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be good to see that. And from your perspective, the well-being and I guess the mental aspects, how does this financial worry, how does it affect people's well-being? Does the research talk to that?
Yeah, so we ask how finances affect mental well-being, physical well-being and relationships, and that's all unfortunately growing. And so over the last 4 or 5 years that we've been researching the Financial Resilience Index, it's just gone upward trajectory. So people are getting more worried about money, maybe more worried about job security, and it really is affecting relationships and physical and mental health, and to a greater degree. So what we're finding is, whereas maybe a couple of years ago people were saying they were worrying about money monthly, that's now moving to weekly and daily as more frequent concerns.
Cool. Yeah. Okay, well, let's turn to some of our panel now. Anna, you, from a bank's perspective, you would come across the realities of human behaviour and the issues that David's addressed. Have you got some input into those areas, you think?
Yeah, I guess something that struck me whilst you were talking, David, so we deal with, at ANZ, we've got, 1 in 3 Kiwis bank with us in one way or in another. So that's the full range of people, from those who are really absolutely struggling to those who are our private bank clients. And I think what we see in the research that we do is that actually many people have a lot of shame and uncertainty around money management. And I would strongly suspect that self-reported confidence in the survey may in fact be something to do with a reluctance to say, I don't feel comfortable and I don't feel confident managing this thing that I think I should be able to as a grown-up. And I think in my role as head of CX and design at the bank, it's not really me, but my team are sort of the voice of customer for people who work in head office, and we constantly have to say, we're all freaks sitting here, incredibly well paid, working in the financial sector, with people all around us who talk about and think about money all the time, and yet still, if you scratch the surface of some of our colleagues, you find that they're actually not very confident or not very comfortable with their own money management, and that they are ashamed of that. And so if you take that thought that people out there, actually the biggest first barrier to get them over is over that sense of shame and failure, then you get to a point of going, well, it's not about saying you should do this or you should do that, but about designing the experiences and interactions that they have to have with us as a bank so that they are accessible, easy to understand, clear, and speak to people from where they start. So taking into account their biases, taking into account the probably incorrect mental models they've got about, KiwiSaver is a great one. Many people will have the sense that I don't like bungee jumping, and therefore I should be in a low-risk fund, which is not the right way to think about this, right? So, and it's no good giving them a 6,000-word product disclosure statement and then going, well, we gave them the product disclosure statement, so clearly they've made a good choice. You actually need to go, if they've got 5 minutes and they're thinking about where their KiwiSaver fund should be in terms of which fund it should be in, how do we present a series of words and graphics that get them from I don't like bungee jumping to I'm 35 and I've bought my first house, so if I'm not in a growth fund, I'm actually going to be poorer than I should be at 65, right? Which is the kind of correct way to think about that in terms of so you have to give them that trade-off. And the way that we traditionally present information is very much about, we've given you all the legal information that you need and now you're on your own team, versus we've actually started from your perspective. And this is where design, customer research, testing, and we even do quant testing of whether people really can understand our experiences. So we've got evidence that this one, 80% of people could understand, and this version only 30% could. Okay, well, we're not going to do that one, even though that one looks like what the lawyers and our risk people think that we should do. So I just think that sense of shame holds people back, and it's on us that we create that shame by making things difficult and incomprehensible, and it's on us to take it away and then free people up to make better decisions. So that's my rant. If any of you heard me speak before, you probably heard me say it before.
So how does... Sorry, James.
On the shame component as well, it's almost like the perception of where I should be and benchmarking myself with actually having no relevant benchmark whatsoever. I was talking to a lady maybe a week ago, and she must have dropped ashamed at least 5 times, and she had north of $1 million in assets. And she was like, I'm so embarrassed with where I am. We should be better. All of these things. You're like, that's not that bad. It's looking okay. And with right now, because the other thing we haven't spoken about is the market we're in. And I think there's a huge amount of risk right now that obviously people are worried around job security. They're worried about high interest rates. They're worried about a whole range of different things. But the big thing to articulate is, one, to run your own race and not worry about what others are doing. And I think you touched on a little bit, focusing on where you want to get to, what you want to do. And the other bit is, if we think too short term about this stuff, the risk is that, when we're in 2021 and things were going really well, we thought that would last forever. And the risk on the other side is pretty significant right now, because there's heaps of opportunity out there, but people need to be thinking long term instead of short term, and thinking that good times or bad times will last.
Cool. Jeremy, from FNZ's perspective, any thoughts on the...
Yeah, so actually Anna and I were talking earlier about this. So FNZ has platforms all over the world. We have about 30 million end customers who invest in some way, shape or form through the product. So you have the traditional advisor-led customer base, which typically people with larger portfolios who can afford professional advice, get good advice, and so grow their wealth and essentially their nest egg for the future, for themselves, for their children. That's not the problem here. The problem is the mass market, and overcoming the shame factor, but also overcoming the other barriers to people saving for their future. So not thinking about it in terms of, I'm investing money, or I run the risk of volatility in the market and therefore losing money, but I'm actually saving for my future. So what does that look like? How much is it going to cost me? And ultimately, are my goals that I'm trying to achieve in the future, which is usually 20, 30 years, to James's point, am I loosely on track, or largely on track to meet those? So from our perspective, technology plays a huge role in that, regardless of whether the individual has professional advice, someone they go and talk to every 6 months about their where they are in terms of meeting their goals, or whether they have no access to that because either they can't afford it or they just don't know where to find it. So the whole concept of scaled advice, or advice through technology that's more attainable for individuals, more accessible, yet still semi-personalised, is something we're looking at. We're looking at leveraging AI to assist with that. Anna and I were sort of debating the various merits of technology-led advice, because you run the risk of moving into the professional advice world, and obviously there's regulations that need to be upheld, there's compliance, there's all that sort of thing. So how do you personalise information to people to make better decisions for their future without it being targeted financial advice? And it's a very sort of delicate dance that you have to play. But we're looking at that. I think another big area for this that we need to tap into is the retirement savings market, because most New Zealanders who earn a wage or earn money, they're investing, and they're investing every month when their paycheck goes into their KiwiSaver. They don't think of it that way. They think about it as being a retirement savings. So they've already made that mental switch away from I'm investing in stocks and shares and managed funds to I'm saving for my future. So how do you leverage that and apply it to the retail direct or the professionally advised cohort of people to essentially make that same leap? One thing we're trying to do is provide all this information in one place for individuals, so they don't have 5 different platforms where they can see their KiwiSaver, which is their future savings, and then their sort of hatch account or whatever, which is their play money that they might invest $50 a month in, and they're not worried about losing or gaining because it's just a bit of fun. How do you stitch all that together so that they actually have a continuous story throughout their life that is all about achieving financial goals, rather than this sort of conscious divide in their mind between savings versus investments? Sorry, Annie, you're going to jump in. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I wonder how different the world would be if they'd called it Kiwi Invest instead of KiwiSaver. I think about that sometimes.
Yeah, it's all about the and you made this point. It's the simplicity. It's the way you convey this information to people so it makes sense without overwhelming them with what is a very, very complex industry.
And can I ask you a question? So, do you have a way of do you have a methodology you apply to understand how you're doing that for customers at FNZ? Oh, you can use the other mic.
Does this work? Check. So look, we do, and we're exploring more efficient ways of actually doing that. So one thing we sort of developed a while back was, and it's all about fact finding. It's about understanding. You made this point around behavioural psychology. Everybody's different. Everybody has a different capacity for loss. Everybody has a different risk appetite, and everybody has different goals. Some people want to save for their retirement, other people want to save to buy a house, other people want to save so that next year they can go to Fiji with their family or buy a car or what have you. So how do you take all that information and distill it into some metrics, some parameters that you can then sort of look up information from the financial markets and make information relevant to that person, rather than just having a page in your application or your website or whatever that's, hey, here's a little bit of financial news, or 101 guide to investing, but it becomes like I said before, semi-personalised to that individual. They're going to be more inclined to read it. It's going to make more sense to them. It's going to be more relevant, and therefore they will start to make better investment decisions. So we've started looking at that as an initial concept. Yeah.
Jeremy, is that a global experience, or do you find that the the Anna mentioned the kind of the move away from complex documentation for clients to be presented with and for concepts to be made plain English, understandable, relatable, etc. Do you find that's different in different jurisdictions coming from FNZ's perspective? Like British, are the British more pedantic, or?
It's a very good question. Are the British more pedantic? I'll avoid that question. That's a separate topic. But look, there are very common themes. So we've done obviously a lot of work in the UK, and with Langcat and other sort of market data providers. We've done some work in the US with Thought Lab on this exact same topic, and the themes are very, very, very similar. What's different is the maturity level of the market. So in the UK, in Australia, for example, the retirement savings market is immensely more mature to New Zealand. I'd say New Zealand's sort of like a toddler running around. Australia would be a mid-20s-year-old adult. In the UK, you're sort of breaching the 30s, sort of 40s. And what that does is it essentially causes the New Zealand general investment pool, so the people that want to save, they understand less about the power of savings. And the power of investing, and the need to...
There's this cultural understanding of the power of that, isn't it?
Riding the waves is an important thing to do, not just investing when the market's high. I mean, when you say it that way, it sounds ridiculous that people would only do that, but people do.
Yep.
You invest when the market's low, invest when the market's high, invest when the market's going up, invest when it's going down, and over time... the data shows that regular investing over a 20, 30-year period will always have better results than not. And so it is a cultural maturity thing that seems to be more advanced in markets where retirement savings have been around longer.
Yep. So they take it more seriously. I guess, certainly my experience in the UK was that non-contributory superannuation funds elicited a very low response rate from the members. A contributory pension fund, what's in it for me, pal? That was the standard response, So, James, you're dealing in the retail space. How do you engender or generate the trust between the advisor and the consumer to help promote to help reduce the gap? How do you see that play out?
So there's probably a couple of different things within that. So one thing that we think we have a responsibility to your point, not just to those who receive advice, but to all Kiwis. Like we're talking about 6,000 word documents. Sometimes they might feel like 6,000 pages. 6,000 word documents. And it's also a topic where people have their head in the sand and they're not particularly interested. And I think a lot of Kiwis don't even know what financial advice means. Like if you go to a person who doesn't have a couple $1 million to invest, what does financial advice mean? A lot of people don't really know. Maybe they've interacted with a mortgage broker, an insurance advisor, or whatever it might be. So the big leg up we've got compared to a lot of other financial advisors. So we do a podcast called Checks and Balances, which has is doing quite well. A lot of people listen to that. So we're quite lucky that our whole thing was we just want to educate Kiwis on making better financial decisions. And we try to think that we're funny sometimes. So we try and do it in a way that is where it's kind of light and interesting and not too deep because nobody wants to hear my problems. So we focus a lot on the podcast element to try and create interest in talking about money. And then when people do come in front of us, it becomes a hell of a lot easier to have those conversations because they feel like they know you a little bit. They know you a little bit already. But once we've got that person in front of us and you're trying to build that relationship, it's really all about not talking about money at all. I found the key to financial advice is you spend for the first good 20, 30 minutes not talking about money at all and talking all about your goals, where you want to be, your family, all of those sort of things. Because we try and make money really complicated, but money's just a tool. Money's just a tool to help you live the life you want to live. And I think I've got, in terms of what people want from their money, I think it's just 4 things. They want to live in a certain box. They want to have a certain lifestyle now. They want to have a certain lifestyle in the future, i.e. retirement. And some people, if they like their kids, want to give them a head start in life. And it's really just those things. And if you break down financial advice and not try and make yourself feel really smart. And because that's the other big problem is like the mix in knowledge between you and the client as well. And I compare it to like builders and building a deck or whatever. These are supple finance hands. Like if you try and watch me build a deck, it's not good, and I've got evidence to show it how bad it can be. But if a builder starts to talk to me about, okay, we're going to go and do these things and whatever, and he makes it more technical, I mean, I don't care about any of it. Do I trust you? Are you going to deliver what you said you would? Am I going to get the product? Is it going to cost me roughly what I think it's going to cost? And I think that's the exact same thing with financial advice. And then when it comes to like budgeting or debt repayment or investments or insurance or KiwiSaver or projections or whatever the hell it is, they're just widgets, and they're just outcomes. So that's how we think about like advice at Lighthouse.
Cool. Alan, turn to you. The aspect that James mentioned there about the trust, that relationship. I mean, from the research that I've had a go at with it over in Sydney, trust comprises two elements. One is that the consumer will assume that because you have qualifications and you can stick a piece of paper on the wall, they'll assume you know what you're talking about. The other aspect of trust is the empathy, how you build the bridge between the client. Now, if it's done through some sort of common interest or common identification, and for some reason that isn't genuine or authentic, that trust element becomes prejudiced and at risk. You've obviously dealt in that behavioural stuff, Daniel Kahneman, et cetera, How do you find that the consumers respond most effectively to that kind of interaction? Is there some ways that you've developed or perfected over the period? Or?
Who was that question directed at?
Yeah, Anne.
Was it at me? Great.
Sorry.
This is one of my other favourite topics, trust. So the trust equation that we most often talk about is authenticity, empathy, and credibility, right? So that's basically what you've said there. And actually, we've just literally been having this conversation recently about as a bank, and a bank for many people, we sometimes get a bit overexcited about sort of adding on bells and whistles. Like, what can we do to, support people to do X, Y, and Z that's, but don't go, or perhaps don't always spend enough attention on, if you actually just want to join us and open a transaction account, is that like really easy? Or if you've got a simple query, like, is it really simple to find it on the website, or do we answer your query really intelligently when you ring us up on the telephone? And all of that goes to that credibility piece. And when you take that into a digital world and you go, well, does our app, can you find what you want in our Go Money app, or is it really hard to work through, right? And so we've just had a bunch of people in my team, our design researchers and designers and behavioural people, do a whole lot of work on the mental models that people are using when they come to our app and what they're actually trying to achieve, and whether the way the app is set up and the navigation is set up facilitates them to do some of the bucketing of money and the other things. And it's actually not about, we're not in a moment where we're going to leap suddenly into a whole new AI-enabled kind of fabulousness, but we can reorganise the app and reorganise how we present people's accounts to make it much more useful. And then that builds our credibility, and that means that we've actually got more permission to suggest that we might be able to help with more complex things. Because if you, and any of you who are ANZ customers, welcome to come and complain later if you've got complaints. But, if you open the app and you're like, where the hell is that blimmin' thing that they advertised to me, and I actually can't find it, the reason for that is that there hasn't been thought put into what's called the IA, the information architecture, the navigation, and getting that right is really tricky and difficult, and needs a lot of thought and care. But unless we do that, it's like having a branch where you don't know where the counter is. You open and you think, well, if I can't even find the counter, I'm not going to trust these people to do more. So empathy is important, and part of that is, and so is competence. And as I said to our leadership team the other day, as we go into a more digital world, design becomes the new front line. So traditionally, for a bank, you had a person, they saw a person, or there was a person on the phone, and you can figure out what they need, and you can understand them, you can express empathy, and then you can meet their need. If it's all digital, you can't do that, right? But the way that you can make your digital experience be sensible and competent and empathetic, and therefore build trust, is by doing all this work up front around research and then testing it and then retesting it and then keeping your, after people have used something, did they like it? Did it work for them? So it's an ongoing work of recognising that just building something and sticking it somewhere in the app is no help. You have to really figure out what are people wanting, how do they get it, how do they find it, and that's where design comes in, and where I think for large service organisations that are becoming more digital, the recognition of design as a key strategic function is really important.
Yep.
The digital point's interesting, right? Because there's also, and you mentioned trust, there's a generational aspect to this, which is underplayed and hugely important, right? I mean, most of the money at the moment is with the older generation, and over the next 20 years, it's going to pass down to your Gen Ys, your Gen Zs, and I mean the research that we've done with Thought Lab suggests that about 3/4 of Gen Zs would trust a technology-born company or digital-born company, so a company that started off with technology, with their investments, with their money, more than an individual, which is contrary
fallible person
to less than 50% of the generation that currently has all the money, who inherently distrust technology, right? So there's.
But is that even true? Like so again, we look at a broader scope of people, but we've just done some work, and there's about 20% of people who call our contact centre who really need a person. The rest, actually, if we just were a bit better on our online stuff, they don't want to talk to us either. And that's across all age bands. It's actually not. There's a slight demographic thing, but until you get up to 80 and you're going, but even those people, they've got smartphones, they'd much rather be able to do it if you just made it useful.
I think the key point though is around your digital journey, right? And it's that companies that are digital born understand this stuff inherently in the user design, whereas companies that have adopted digital and technology recently to try and obviously fill a gap that wouldn't exist otherwise. They're not getting it right because of the reasons you've outlined, and so my numbers there were around that technology-born adoption of the in terms of Gen Z versus the sort of Gen X and older. They're more likely to want to go with technology that's inherently user-centric.
Because of legacy stuff, right? I guess
essentially,
big organisations are stuck with the legacy IT
it's harder
systems
for them to make the right change. It's harder for them to attract people to work for them who know what they're doing in terms of usability design. There's loads and loads and loads of barriers that they have. Whereas companies that started off with technology, they don't have those barriers, so they're more agile, more adept at making these changes, and that sits better with the younger generation. Is what we're seeing data anyway.
Jeremy, is the challenge then, sorry David, is the challenge then for some of the larger established players in the market to make that transition to become technology companies that actually distribute product, as opposed to product providers that adopt technology to distribute the products? Because I've got some examples of it. Kiwi Advisor Network, for example, on the mortgage broking side in Auckland here, they started off with Trail software, mortgage broking software, and it was hugely successful. In fact, so successful they set up a network of advisors to subscribe to their software, and also then added on other services that they could provide for those advisors. So they're definitely a technology company that became a distributor advisor. So
I mean, from our experience, it's a partnership, right? Because so talking about FNZ, right? We have the technology. And the knowledge on how to build platforms that interact well with customers and users and advisors.
Yep.
But we don't have the network, and we don't have essentially the investments.
Yep.
And so we tend to partner with financial institutions like ANZs, etc. And it's almost that sort of symbiotic relationship that solves that bigger problem, rather than one organisation trying to do it all themselves. That is very tricky.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. David, is that?
I was just going to ask a question actually in terms of how that, so big organisations are one thing, but smaller organisations, smaller Smaller FAPs are going to have a huge challenge in terms of technology and bringing things together. And I just wondered, in terms of from a FAP perspective, what your views are.
Yeah, so I worked for a bank for 10 years. So I'm thinking about, like what you're suggesting in terms of running faster, and there's all these legacy systems underneath and how hard it is to get these things to change. Versus on the flip side, with a FAP, there are so many systems out there. There is so many tools that you can find that are modular that you can change to get to work for you. Like at the moment at Lighthouse, we're automating financial plan writing for holistic financial advice, and we're really excited about where that's going and what we're doing. And we're a company of we've got 30 staff, we've got 5,000 clients. We're not huge, but you can go and find all these tools, and if you find smart people with the right skill sets to implement it, I would argue that we can be way faster than a lot of these really large institutions that have been around for a long time, just because of the speed to try things and to implement them.
Sure.
Going to argue with that?
Yeah. No. One question I was going to ask you guys in terms of the provision of advice, or the receipt of the provision of advice. Some of the experiences I had in Australia, through in Sydney particularly, talking to financial advisors, there was usually this expectation from their clients that they were going to shoot the lights out every quarter. And if they didn't, then, and for whatever we tried, but behavioural stuff, tried to get the advisors away from the conversation, steer the conversation away from returns, and look at the horizon, the longer horizon. This is 25 years we're looking at, not the last 3 months. Do you find that still common in the marketplace, or?
Yes. Or? Yeah. Well, I think financial advice. I mean, we're talking about intergenerational wealth and those who have a lot of the money at the moment, who are comfortable with the system the way it is, right? Like, you pay a fee, the fee is whatever the fee is. The fee is, depending on the institution, somewhat baked into whatever we're doing. And there's not really the discussion around potentially to the extent of what is the value that I am answering, what is the value I'm giving for the fee. Now, if you're talking to clients between 35 and 45, who are going to be inheriting this money, they're going to be asking a hell of a lot more questions. They're going to be Googling around. They're going to be talking about what value that you're adding off the back of it, which is why we sit in the holistic financial advice space, because it's not about it. I mean, there needs to be you need to be meeting the client's expectations, and you need to be delivering the outcomes that you're meant to be delivering over a period of time. But it's coming back to those. People just want those 4 things, and how do you deliver those 4 outcomes? And money is just a tool to help you live the life you want to be. If you're an advisor based on we're the best performing fund out there or something like that, that works until it doesn't work.
Anna, do you find that in the bank, that the clients are expecting the consistent Bobby Dazzler type results every time you meet them? Or?
Well, so I don't ever meet clients face to face, I should be clear. And I guess the perspective I would take on this is probably going back to previous roles where I've been head of investments or head of KiwiSaver and other institutions. I mean, some people are really chasing returns.
Yep.
As a generalisation, and this is not specific to the bank I currently work for, those people don't have their investments with a bank from a KiwiSaver point of view. You know, there's a really interesting thing about what the brand permission of banks is to offer to people in different types of personas and things. And there are people for whom sort of the big brand and having things all together and a sort of a more cautious approach to their finances all sort of fit, and a desire for more guidance and safety all fits together. And then there are people whose mindset is very much about chasing returns. I know how to do this myself, you know, and those people just don't tend to have their investments with banks as much. So there's just quite a different kind of mindset, which isn't to say that we shouldn't be delivering good returns for our customers.
Sure.
You know, obviously we should be. So it's quite a different environment inside the bank. And then our private bank is a different, you know, kettle of fish again, where they're working much more directly with customers.
High net worth. David, any add?
I was just, when you were talking about that, I was just reflecting to when people all got scared when COVID came over and locked in the losses in KiwiSaver, and it just brings me back to that kind of point again of, you know, people are trying to make priorities, and the research backs us up, and they don't necessarily know where the priorities are, and so reacting because there's a void of knowledge or where to go to even help, and just again it goes back to that first story about how friends are giving, well, I'm doing this because, and then everyone follows. It's just crazy.
Just share two things on that. So one is that I have a dear friend who's a lot older than I am, and is actually just hitting retirement when the COVID crash came, and he rang his KiwiSaver provider, and they told him to switch his fund to cash at the bottom of the bloody market. And he told me afterwards, and I said, clearly I'm not going to give you any financial advice, but oh my goodness. And he said the advisor on the end of the phone said to him, I wouldn't usually say this, but maybe this time it's different, like you better. And I just couldn't believe it, right? So I won't name who he was with, but oh my goodness, like appalling. And that's actually the fear that a professional advisor should not be reacting to in that moment, you know, but how intense was our collective fear in that moment. But the other thing is, so I think there's three things for KiwiSaver, putting aside when you get to decumulation, that's a whole other kettle of fish, but right fund, right contribution, don't panic, right? And the don't panic piece is actually, you need to set up that mental model for people as they're going into their fund, you know, making clear to them that this is a slow and steady, but you won't have as much at the end. This is an up and down, but you're going to have more at the end. And then I think as responsible providers, you need to be ready to act when the market is falling. Send them a comm that you have pre-tested, that you know they understand what you're trying to get them to do, which is don't panic, right? So one of the KiwiSaver providers I've worked with has got a set of pre-tested comms that were quant tested and qual tested, and we know if we sent out to people age, you know, you make a matrix, where are you in terms of retirement and which fund are you in? Okay, the message that you need to hear is going to be this when the market's dropping. You know, and for lots of people it's just don't jump, you know, and you can't say it quite like that, but you need to craft a comm that lands with people and then goes, well, actually, if you really do want to jump, ring us and we'll talk you down off the ledge. You know, and that's you've got to think that through, and you've got to be ready to act, and it's not about having an individual advisor for all of you, you know, whatever it is, 1 million customers you've got. But it's actually going, how do we instill those three things? Right fund, right contribution, don't panic.
I like those comms, the insert crisis and then copy and paste generic comms, because it's the same thing, just depending on the matrix and the age of life, right?
It doesn't matter why the markets have suddenly, so that's the little blank bit, you know, but the idea that you're sitting there with a set of comms that you've tested against your customers and your different mindsets, and you know you're going to send them off, and again, you know, to our collective responsibility in terms of conduct and customer care and making sure people make informed decisions. You know, it's on us to send them a comm that helps them do the right thing, not to send them a comm that go, oh, dovish markets and blah blah blah, you know, and they go, you know, help. Yeah.
This is one thing that you can use historic data to prove, though. So the words "don't panic" are great, but you can show.
Don't panic because
you can show the 2008 GFC. You can show people that continue to invest into their growth funds through that time, in 2015, 2016, had much better financial outcomes than those who switched to cash products or you know low. And
I always feel I have to add, unless capitalism breaks, but in which case we've got a lot more things to worry about, right? So assuming that piece sits okay, then you know you can rely on historical data. Sorry.
No, you're 100% right. But like I think that's the power of data, and going forward, you know, again I say this, AI, you know, plays a role here, because you can trillions and trillions of data points for any single thing you want to look at. Nobody's going to sift through all of that. But if you've got clever, intelligent systems that can use a particular scenario to get the relevant data points to present to a person, make it semi-personalised to them, it has a bigger impact. So there's the message, really, really important. And then there's well, this actually makes sense to me, because this is a very similar situation that happened or whatever, and I can relate my investment decisions to that example. Therefore, I'm going to be more compelled to not panic. You know, so it's a
Panic, but hold on.
yeah. Panic in the short term, and in the long term be okay.
Yeah. So maybe look, this might be an American thing, I don't know, but there's an old boy I met years back, Nick Murray. Some of you may have come across in your time. But Nick's speech to the $1 Million Round Table in New Orleans a few years back, 16,000 life insurance advisors from all around the world, and very few investment guys who charge fees made the trip. But Nick's an old investment advisor from New York, financial planning type. And his view basically was, in front of these 16,000 guys, that the financial planners always get it wrong. The investment guys, as soon as it hits the fan, they head for the stochastics or the charts or the graphs or something, and all these life insurance advisors just go out to their clients and sit and hold their hands. Don't worry, it's going to be all right. We're on track. Don't panic. And that's that behavioural thing that each of you have actually touched on in relation to client interaction and client trust, empathy, whatever, but not, as you say, to throw the baby out the bathwater when things, the crisis du jour.
And part of like human psychology is when something is happening particularly bad, you feel better to do something. So if I and I have a big part of financial advisor is just being like, no, that's a stupid idea, don't do that. And like, yeah, I'm trying to get the 2-year-old to work through that, but no, it's not working. But that's a big part, right? You feel better from doing something, but it's actually the worst thing you can do. And if you go to your financial advisor, all these comms are sent out, which are as you're talking through them, like these are so bloody important because the clients who have advice is probably going to be sweet. It's all those people who don't have an advisor. But you call your advisor and go, what are we going to do about this? And you go like, absolutely nothing. And that actually probably doesn't make the person feel any better, right, in isolation. But you do feel better from doing something than not doing something, which is the opposite to what you should do.
Cool. Some questions from our distinguished guests here, if I can. One here from Nathan. Do you think there is a spending problem or an income problem in New Zealand, or neither, or both? Thanks, Nathan. Great question.
I have a friend who says all problems are on the income side.
Yeah, I like that saying. I don't have an expense problem, I have an income problem. I think it's both. I think like if you... so coming back to those stats around like how confident Kiwis feel with their money, I would probably say 80% of people we talk to, and these are good income earners with good jobs that you go, oh, these are smart people, they know what they're doing with their money. 80% would say they have a budget and they know what they're doing with it. Probably 20% are actually know where their money is going. And then if we're talking about New Zealand being prosperous and kind of holding ourselves against, you know, a lot of Kiwis going overseas and the brain drain, etc. I do think that is 100% the problem is incomes in New Zealand compared to potentially other places in the world. How do you attract good quality talent so people can get ahead? So, but I think it's probably both.
And just to add to the question, I'm not going to answer the question, I'm going to answer a different question because that's my prerogative. But it comes from the research, and the research is, and again, we're launching it tomorrow, so under embargo, whatever. But you know, he's going to tell us. I am going to tell. You know, we're talking, as you say, we're talking about the advised, and there's a whole majority that aren't advised, or 3/4, or whatever the actual number is, and these people are making real hard choices at this moment in time about whether to, on the higher end, you know, that people are switching into buying cheaper goods or managing their income that way. But on the real tough end, people are choosing whether to take medicine or put their heating on. And I think, you know, we just to broaden the conversation, which is why I'm not answering the question directly, is actually it's different as we go through all the demographics and earnings and the people that get advice. You know, it's maybe a little easier to be able to convince, help, support. It's the people that are having to make these choices in a difficult financial time, having come out of a probably pretty good time and not understanding what priorities and choices to make within the financial services system because they just don't get it.
I just wanted to say something I've been thinking about recently, which is, our hedonic baselines, right, which means how happy do you feel, how happy do things make you over time, the same things. And one of the ways to feel very happy in your life is to live in an area where you are comparatively well off compared to the people around you, right? So I live in Onehunga, and I'm probably much happier than I would be if I was living in Remuera, because Onehunga is a great place to live, but I'm certainly near the top of the band of the people who choose to live in Onehunga. And I think, we could get into very deep discussion about economic development and, distance and productivity and all sorts of things. But New Zealand, as a small, distant country, is nowhere near as wealthy as we used to be. And so collectively, we don't get the lifestyle that truly rich countries get. And so how do we think about that as a country, and what do we get that's still good, I think, is one of the questions as well. And how do we set our hedonic baselines so that we are contented, which is not a message aimed at people who are choosing between medicine and heating, but is possibly a message aimed at people who are choosing between a new car and a trip to Fiji,
Cool. Another question. Nathan, you have another question. I'll come back to your second one, Nathan. It's from Helia. There's a common theme that financial literacy and understanding what is financial advice and how to access it needs to be addressed in adults. But what about working with children to start embedding the culture of accessing financial advice in the same way people know to go to the doctor when they're sick? Who wants to pick that one up?
I can pick that up from a technology standpoint. And one thing we've launched in the UK a long time ago is in line with UK legislation around the ISAs, which is a government savings scheme that's not retirement based, but it's very similar to a KiwiSaver construct, with junior ISAs and trying to get younger people investing, because hey, if I put in $50 a month, the government's going to match that. I'm going to get some free money. So that's a good incentive. Free money for kids is a great incentive. But it's and so having an easy way of doing that, and I think also in some ways it's the parent's responsibility. You're gonna have children who are more likely to think about saving if their parents think about saving and investing to achieve a goal. We've started working with Ngāi Tahu Whairawa Investment Fund, and that's a phenomenally well set up fund. They have 50,000 members, and they will match for every dollar put in. They will match for an adult up to a certain maximum. I can't remember what it is. They'll match $1 for $1. For kids, they'll match $4 for every dollar.
Wow.
So it's a huge incentive for young Ngāi Tahu iwi members to invest and save, and they're not saving for retirement, they're saving for university education, or they're saving potentially for their first house. But it's and so the goals are adjusted to their sort of age and stage. But it is a really powerful mechanism for getting younger people into the, we talked about it before, that sort of cultural mindset of saving for the future. So a couple of things from my perspective. One is that sort of contribution matching, but then there's the accessibility and the ease of use. There's the technology side of things. There's, if there's a mobile app, your Gen Zs are going to be much more likely to use it every day than if they have to go into an advisor's office and talk to them, which they would never do. Right? So there's a few different things from my perspective.
Yeah, there's a couple of good tools out there. So like in terms of schools, so Square One and Banker, which we both had on our podcast. So Square One's really cool in terms of like how you teach kids around pocket money from a young age, and you can give them a card and create a whole kind of framework in there. And then Banker obviously around like educating kids within school, but just like touching on the, like with this stuff, you can't outsource the financial literacy. Like the parents need to take responsibility within it, because the amount of times where I've seen, meet the parents, they've got a credit card that's maxed out. You meet the kids got a credit card that's maxed out. Is like the education component is to support, but they're looking at the parents to be the role models with their finances as well.
And I think that goes back right to the beginning in terms of, we know that people are overconfident in their capabilities and not necessarily as capable as they may think. And if kids coming home from school after experiencing something around budgeting or finance and the parent just doesn't know how to answer or isn't fully aware or not sure, comes to people, or is ashamed, to your point. Yeah. There's a real tough nut in there somewhere, I think.
Yes, I remember a few years back when Davy Boyle was still at the retirement commissioner, and he spent, I don't know how many thousands of taxpayers' dollars going around the schools trying to teach the kids about KiwiSaver. And, as soon as he left, they were back into playing rugby, hockey, whatever, forget. Because the teachers were not financially literate. They had no means of backing up or endorsing what was said in David's visit. So, the banker stuff that, I think teachers learned just as much as the kids did.
Yeah, and I get it. Like, is it a teacher's responsibility to teach the kids around, like financial literacy? Like it needs to be done, but you look about how much teachers, the responsibility they have and how much they have to teach. Like, that's why it's not solved, right? It's complicated.
Yeah. They've got enough on their plates, I think, without adding to their burden. Another couple of questions here, if I can. To the panel, would you say traditional financial advice or a broad estimated financial plan is more important, and why? The latter seems more scalable and beneficial for the mass market. So the broad estimated financial plan is more important than traditional financial advice. Does that stimulate the...
Yeah, I guess the question is what is traditional financial advice is probably the first thing I would say. If you go, what is going to have the biggest impact on New Zealand? All Kiwis having some access to financial advice is far better for the majority of Kiwis than a small subset getting some advice. And then you go, well, how do you use AI and do it in a smart way and potentially some level of self-service that you can get a lot of these outcomes pretty quickly. I think the other tricky piece, which maybe FNZ need to solve, is when it comes to in terms of New Zealand, getting these things off the ground in New Zealand is very hard just because of the size of the population, right? So to have these tools where you can, companies can come in and go, this makes sense to invest in this, is also another tricky piece.
Yeah. Okay. From Aradna, sorry if I've mispronounced the name, but we've heard a lot about advice for higher income earners, but does the panel have a view about advice on basic financial products and options to create future resilience so that we can prevent people from worrying about money on a daily basis? And how do we think about cultural beliefs to consider getting financial advice? Is there some barriers based on culture to obtaining that?
Well, this is sort of a little bit in the sweet spot of a bank's broad concern with financial well-being, I guess, because most of our customers don't fall into the high end, seeking financial advice from us point of view. But how do we make each engagement that people have with us one in which they're able to make a well-informed decision about which basic products they're taking up and how they're using them and whether those are suitable for them, which again are, conduct obligations that we've got as providers of financial services. And again, it comes down to actually combining your business knowledge and your knowledge about behavioural science and your design so that those experiences kind of work on if someone's giving us 5 minutes of attention to get something done, is embedded in that the ability for them to make a better choice than they otherwise would. And so I get a little bit itchy when people talk too much about financial literacy and financial education, because there's no lack of information. Anyone who wants to learn anything about any topic in the world can find that with a simple Google search. So it's not about a lack of information. It's about again, the confidence, the motivation, the right timing. And so I think as a really big mass market provider of basic products that people need to use, it's on us to make sure that when you come to us to sign up for a credit card or roll over your home loan or do whatever you're doing, the way that we present that gives you the best mental model about what trade-offs you're actually making, how that product actually works, and what the best way to use it for you is, so that we set you up for success in sort of small increments rather than making it this big job. Whilst also, I think, trying to encourage people that if they were ready to sit down and spend an hour or two thinking about a more holistic financial plan, that would be great, but not assuming that that's the answer, that the answer actually is each time you interact with us, we make it helpful and we make those decisions tend to be more good rather than tend to be more bad. And if you think about Temu, any of you who've encountered Temu, all of their work is designed to get you to purchase another thing, right? And they know how to do that and they're quite good at it. It might not work for all of you, but that's what they're doing, right? We can set ourselves up if we're smart enough and dedicated enough to it and we get the right processes in place to say that every time you interact with us, you get a little bit better off by making a slightly better decision without sending you a big list of homework to do. Very anti-homework.
Yeah.
Okay, but we've got to go into the workshop, actually. You guys are going to work for your supper, by the way. You're not getting off scot-free. There's one more question. It was for Anna. So, like, do the ANZ Bank or do the big banks have budgets for R&D for innovation and new ideas, etc.? The observation and the question is that open banking has been really slow to arrive in New Zealand, and how is that kind of part and parcel of the long-term strategy? Or
yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think all of us, if I could speak for all banks here for a moment, I mean, all of us know that the future is digital, the future is open banking, the future is being closer to the customer, the future is innovation, and I mean, there's a chunk of my team that are working on those things right now, as we speak, and that will be the same in the other banks. That's probably as much as I can sort of safely or confidently say, but it's not like nobody, I think, is sitting inside any of our banks or financial institutions and going, it's just, we don't need to pay attention to this, but it's how do we prioritise among all the other things that we need to do to keep customers safe and meet AML requirements and, upgrade our technology and all of that. But it's certainly, very much front of mind for leadership teams and people in delivery.
Right. Well done. Thanks, Hannah. Terrific stuff. Good questions. Thank you, everyone. This is the bit where you get to earn your corn now. These are the questions that are being dished out by Clarissa. This is the bit where you can exercise your extensive intellect and experience and apply it to the questions that are being presented. So we'll give this 30 minutes for you guys to come out with the responses. Our lovely panel chappies, girls and boys here, or girl and boys, will be circulating amongst you to stimulate the conversation. If you wouldn't mind, we'll just spend a couple of minutes with each table giving us some conclusions. We've only got 2 minutes. We're going to be late for Fidelity's free drinkies. So take advantage of the hospitality, etc. So can we start here? Whoever's spokesperson, just a couple of minutes on.
The question that we got was how can we effectively address the perception gap effect in both consumers and financial advice professionals to improve their self-awareness and confidence?
Yeah, good one.
A lot of really good conversation, but some key things that came out of it was maybe, where Anna said that there is a lot of information out there, there's no lack of information, but how do we get people to actually care about wanting to know these things? How do we make them realise what's the value of this for me? So that was a key thing around consumers and how we communicate to different demographics. It's great having all of these comms, no reads them. So how do we engage that way? In terms of our FAs and FATs, looking at their confidence and having outcomes-focused conversations. the landscape of financial advisors has changed a lot recently, and a lot of our older advisors who were just grandfathered over, as you were saying, it's kind of like we sort of upskill as much as we can and put band-aids over them, but they don't have the skills to actually have those types of conversations and actually say to their clients, no, this is not a good option for you, or no, we're not going to be able to achieve that goal given your, risk appetite or requirements and goals, etc. And I think there isn't that confidence around that.
Good observations. Yeah, very astute. I hope everyone who's got a FAP licence is taking note. Well done. Good one. Kevin, or are you the spokesperson, Kevin? Surprise me. Go on.
The question we had was what strategies can be implemented to make financial advice more accessible and affordable for the general population, especially those on lower incomes or with limited financial literacy. So, great to know that we've got lots of child teaching programs like Banker and Square One out there, but to the addressing also the shame issue of the parents' generation, we need parent and child education options around financial literacy that go hand in hand. And they will also obviously need to have various different teaching tools and formats to allow parents to engage in that process. We also need advocacy messaging from national leaders. So right from the top, to be setting the tone. Workplace sessions for employees around financial literacy, making those available. And to that point, there's also some businesses out there that have already started this, but it could be done on a bigger scale. And that is not just talking about employee benefits on a group insurance scheme basis, but also on other wellness things outside of insurance, outside of what we've normally traditionally come and have a conversation on. We've also got to make sure that the messaging that goes out there is varied, so that it actually is respectful of different demographics and different communities in the marketplace. Technology, obviously, the apps that people can find easily and use easily. We need financial literacy campaigns by the industry, not by suppliers. We've got to take away perception of you're just pushing a particular barrow and conflict of interest.
Is that via the FSC, you think, Kevin?
Oh, funny that, yeah.
David?
Yeah. So, David, you got that? Yep. We've also got to really emphasise low and easy entry options that address affordability and enable people to come in with low, easy contribution options. We've also got to think about publicity campaigns which talk about the benefits of advice. We see on TV1 once a week the good sorts on the end of the news on a Sunday night about someone who's done good in the community. So where's that good sort type messaging about claims that are paid and other good stories of what the industry does? We need those little and often messages all the time.
Cool. Some good stuff. I think you should put that in writing to the Prime Minister as well. Good one. Table at the back there.
All right. Our question was, what role can education and awareness campaigns play in bridging the perception gap and encouraging New Zealanders to seek professional advice? So I think, obviously, a huge role, if not maybe one of the only options to bridge the gap. Picking up on the panel's conversation earlier, removing shame and getting people to realise their own capability first and foremost, and then working on the people getting back to basics of financial literacy, making sure the messaging of any education or awareness campaign is simple, like simplifying things, making it anonymous as well, so there isn't that shame aspect that people can fair aspect, but give it a shot. Accessibility is really important as well, and having access to education, being able to access that, and also having it personalised to them. Jeremy talked about that a lot. Personalisation is very important. And then into, well, when you do it as well, for us it was starting early, and our young people, even making, well, it's got to be government mandated, like financial literacy in our schools, making it fun, gamifying it, and then lastly, around maybe providing general advice with education, with a pathway into finding the professional financial advice from you.
Good. Great stuff. Well done, guys. Spokesperson.
We had the same question. Similar kind
Yeah,
of answers.
that's all right. Different views, same.
Similar suggestions.
Yeah.
We talked about employers as being a really important part of this, because when, we talked about how students and schools and stuff, that already kind of overloaded with a lot of information, and actually when people get their first paycheck is a really perfect opportunity for people to start really engaging. We thought, wouldn't it be great if when your employer had a really great financial wellbeing program, and you also got to speak to a financial advisor at that key point in your life. We talked about kind of changing some of that messaging around these are the kind of strategies that you need to approach managing your money, to start thinking and talking about framing it around your relationship with money. So creating safe spaces for people to talk about money. It isn't about what's your salary, etc. Because no one wants to talk about that. We talked about having some kind of something to create kind of quality information. So how do you know that this advice is actually good advice? And we talked about social media, and there's lots of great stuff on there, but is that good? I don't know. Some of it's great. We also talked about the need for the government to start mandating a lot of this stuff. As an industry, what can we do? What do we need to really step into? And probably putting some proper cash behind awareness campaigns would be pretty good. And we talked about gender equity quite a lot, and how that women do have a much lower financial well-being. So what can we do to really strengthen over half the population's financial well-being?
Terrific. Yeah, the theme of the government and the industry combining to get some sort of initiative underway seems to be a common thread as anyway, last table. Save the best till last.
So we have the same question, which is what strategies can we implement to make financial advice more accessible and affordable, especially for those with low incomes and limited financial literacy? So like something else we spoke about, starting this at a young age, so in schools and so looking at creating, getting people to create, savings, KiwiSaver account, when they're young. I know, for example, like when you join university, you often have these tertiary accounts. Yep. So setting up something for kids early on, and I think the adding of the sort of parent education is a big part of it, because it needs to be at the school and also at home. We also spoke about more funding to budget advisors. So there's probably not that many in New Zealand, and there should be more funding going so they can, the other people on the ground with clients and helping people that are at most risk. So that's really important. More funding around that, and probably around sort of the value of advice. So people know, because people in New Zealand don't know they need advice. It's they don't know issue. We also spoke about changing the language around how we talk about financial advice, because people perceive that it's out of reach. So rebranding financial advice, calling it something else. Also more around limited scope general advice. For getting to sort of people with low incomes and those with limited financial literacy, general advice will be suitable. They don't need in-depth advice. More tools, so digital tools, robo-advice as well, so people that can't pay for advice have access to it. We also spoke around a targeted approach to particular cohorts. So, there's a lot of community bankers that are working in the community space. There's also new employees So we also spoke about making mandatory that when you start a job, you join KiwiSaver, it's mandatory that the employer arranges KiwiSaver education. And diversity in the advisor industry space as well. You know, people like to deal with people that are like them. So typically in the investment world, that's a lot of, there is a lot of diversity. And also reviewing PDS and banking and investment documents. A lot of it is, there's too much jargon. People don't read it. So they're actually a waste of time.
Good one. Great observations. Terrific. All round. Okay, look, that's grand. I think you guys have spent a good deal of intellectual energy in creating those responses. I think hopefully the panel will take a note of them. Just in a wind up and a wrap up of the afternoon's proceedings, I'm going to ask each of them to just give us their final thoughts on the perception gap and how it might be bridged in light of what we've heard this afternoon from you guys. Anna, do you want to kick off?
Cheers. Well, thanks for all of that, team. I think, for me, it's, as I've already said, as a primary financial institution for a third of New Zealanders, for ANZ, it's on us to make it easy and fruitful for people when they interact with us, and not to create barriers and create shame. So that's the mission that I'm on at ANZ.
Yeah, thanks. Well, for me, it's clearly using technology to make these things more accessible to a wider population of people, personalise it in whatever way we can without having to have an individual, all the time for someone to speak to. But it's we can use technology like AI, etc., and all the data that's available to semi-personalise information, and lowering the cost really through transparency. Now, technology plays a part in that as well, in what information we serve up to people and how we attach it to their goals, but also the entire industry plays a part in that as well. If you don't make it affordable, it'll never be accessible. And then education. I love the points people are making around schools and parents and that sort of thing. And it reminds me of a meme that goes around Facebook all the time, which is, I wish that in maths at high school they had taught me how to file my tax return instead of Pythagoras' theorem. And I actually happen to have a degree in mathematics, and I use Pythagoras' theorem every week, really. But I suspect I suspect I'm really bad at filing my taxes, and so. But I guess the general point there is that I think everybody in New Zealand and the system plays a role in trying to fix this problem as well. So that's my final thoughts.
Yeah, and I'll follow on from that. And I think it's about collaboration. I really like the idea that came out around how we do education campaigns, but how we do that as an industry together, maybe with government and supporting. And there's some strides into that. And we'll hear from the Retirement Commission tomorrow around the national strategy and the way that's starting to work. But I just think for me, collaboration is key. And if we can be same language many times, that will help in some of these basic areas.
Yeah, I really like the idea around financial education for, in businesses as well. And like you think about, you can get some life insurance, somebody come and talk to you about KiwiSaver, but like the idea of like your first job, somebody will help you set up a budget, stay away from bad debts, set some goals for the future, all those sort of things. I really like that idea. The main thing, that I think about is just, we talked about like making sure people aren't like ashamed and all those things. The other thing is getting people to care like about their money, and that's what we try and do with the podcast is and all the stuff we do is just trying to get people to have like some level of education. We like live in this world, and it's where we're in it, but for a lot of people it's something that they're trying their best to stay away from it and not think about it as much as possible, and going, how do you make it as approachable as possible? And I would even challenge some of the way that some of these questions were written, where I read that question, I was like, what the hell does that mean? And I think just like trying to make it really easy, really, 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 really approachable. They were great questions.
Well said. Well said. Look, I think there's clearly a lot of common themes that you've all identified in the areas of education and some of the behavioural stuff that we've touched on. And certainly, if there was some more involvement at employer level in the KiwiSaver space, I think, don't get onto a hobby horse, but that's certainly something that has a role to play, as one or two of you have mentioned. Look, I'd just like to say thanks to all of you for coming along this afternoon. The start of the conference, or the conference proper, starts tomorrow. I'd like to say thanks to Clarissa, my lovely assistant here, and to Tim for putting together a decent run sheet for us to run with. And, of course, to our 4 panellists here who have given up some of their valuable time to share their views and experiences and guidance on how we might bridge the perception gap. May I wish you a very enjoyable rest of the conference, and good evening with the Fidelity guys and the formal gala dinner tomorrow night. Thanks for your time. Thank you.